A child was born in a world without time. It did not cry, it did not breathe, but it felt everything. This is the story of the first divide, and it became afraid. The moment when feeling became power, and power became fear. Long before the Jedi, long before the Sith, there was only the Force. It moved between stars not yet formed. It breathed through dust not yet shaped. It had no language, no morality, no desire. But it had presence. It had will. Some called it Ashla. Some called it Bogan. But in the beginning, it had no name. It simply was. Across endless systems, life began to emerge. Cells turned to creatures, creatures formed minds. And within a scattered few, the Force stirred. Not all life could feel it, but some did. The Thuyor called them. Great pyramids rising from the void, built by ancient hands. They were not Jedi. They came from distant places, from forests, oceans, mountains, and stars. They were not Sith. They were something older. The Force moved through them like breath through lungs. They did not control it. They listened, meditated, but silence does not last. Became silent to feel its music. Among them were those who did not wish to listen. They wished to speak, to bend the Force, not to be bent by it. And that was the first crack. Not a war, not a rebellion, a question. If the Force is alive, can it be commanded? There were no temples. There were no armies, but there was conflict. One path led to harmony, the other to dominance. This was not yet light and dark. It was still formless, still new, but the choice had already been made. And the Force felt it. In the void beyond Tython, something began to change. Storms churned where there had been stillness. Visions came uninvited, and some began to disappear. Not die, disappear, waiting. As if the Force was no longer speaking, but watching. Not of evil. The oldest among them warned of imbalance, but of hunger, that it had boundaries even its servants could not cross. They said the Force could be stretched too far, but the younger ones did not listen. They were not cruel. They were curious, and curiosity, when unchecked, becomes fire. They were not called Jedi. They were not called Sith. Their names are forgotten, but the echo of their choices still haunts the stars. They came from many worlds, some near, some far, some that no longer exist. They were hunters, healers, builders. They had no order, no code, but they felt something deeper than instinct. They heard the Force, not as commands, but as a presence, like a memory that had not yet happened, like a whisper coming from within. Among the earliest were the Dai Bendu monks of the Cold Moon Jeddah. Meditation. They studied silence. They did not speak unless it brought harmony. Far away on Dathomir, the Quad had already mastered interstellar gates. They believed the Force was breath, to be felt, not forced. They built with power, but they did not rule. They believed the Force was balance, and when that balance tipped, they sealed their own technology away and vanished into legend. And then there were the Rakata. They did not hear the Force. They commanded it. The Rakata were not listeners. They were conquerors. Their connection to the Force was fueled by dominance, pain, and rage. And through this hunger, they created the infinite empire. Their cruelty spanned whole sectors. They built weapons that tore stars apart and enslaved entire species, the humans of Coruscant, the Wookiees of Kashyyyk, the Togruta of Shili. But something was wrong. One by one, they lost their connection to the Force. Even as they expanded, their strength began to fail. Not from weakness, but as if the Force itself had turned its face away. That the Force, alive and ancient, had chosen silence over submission. The infinite empire collapsed. Some whispered that their cruelty had broken something sacred, and the stars grew quiet again. The Rakata had not invented force power, but the damage had already spread. Across the outer rim, across wild space, across forgotten systems, force-sensitive beings began to appear in growing numbers. No longer just in monks or tyrants, but in children, in travelers, in those who did not understand what they were. They had only provoked it. The Tithans were among them, but they built temples. They built no empire, and they watched the stars. 9 great pyramids, the KOTOR, arrived from unknown creators and gathered force sensitives from across the galaxy. No one knows who built them. No one knows how they knew where to go. But those who entered them were taken to one world, Tython. There, for the first time, a gathering was formed. Not a government, not a religion, a question. Where does it come from? What is this power? And who are we to touch it? Some meditated, some trained, some explored, and some began to feel that the Force had 2 voices, one that brought peace. At first they tried to walk both paths, and one that brought strength. They believed the Force was a wheel, turning, always balanced. But balance does not mean stillness. It means tension. It means conflict. And though they did not know it yet, Tython would not remain peaceful for long. Because those who feel the Force eventually try to shape it. And once shaped, power never forgets the hand that held it. Curiosity is not evil. It begins as wonder. But when wonder meets the unknown, it begins to ask for answers. And answers have always been the most dangerous kind of power. In Tython, the Force whispered in 2 voices. One was calm, a stream that healed and taught. The other was fierce, a tide that defended and destroyed. The Tithes called them Ashla and Bogan. They believed both were sacred. Light and dark, harmony and passion. For centuries they studied balance. When storms struck, they meditated. They built temples in pairs, one bathed in sunlight, one carved into shadow. Their knowledge deepened, but so did their questions. When visions came, they recorded them on crystal tablets. What if the Force could be shaped into pure energy? These were not questions of faith. What if life itself could be created by will? They were questions of control. Among them rose a few who could move mountains with thought. They called themselves Jefta-Dia, mystics of the Force. They sought unity, yet their hearts began to drift. Each lesson brought new power. The Jedi believed they were protectors of balance. And with each power came temptation to use it, to test it, to see what lay beyond restraint. But balance demands equality. And equality dies the moment one side believes it understands more than the other. A storm greater than any before erupted on Tython. It was not weather. It was the Force itself, in turmoil, drawn by the conflict of minds that sought to master it. Ashla and Bogan collided. The world screamed. Mountains broke. Lightning turned the skies white. Many Jedi fell into madness. Some disappeared into the dark valleys of Bogan, believing the Force had chosen them as its true voice. Others fled to the sunlit plains, swearing never to use their gifts again. And between them stood those who understood too late that they had crossed a line that could never be undone. When the storm ended, the world was scarred, but something new had begun. Discipline, doctrine, fear. They built the temple of knowledge to preserve what was left. Meditation became law. They taught restraint as a virtue. Yet even as they rebuilt, whispers of power remained. Emotion became sin. Because they had seen what curiosity could do. They studied the midi-chlorians that bound life together. Some still dreamed of bending reality. They theorized that the Force itself could be concentrated, refined, shaped like fire in a forge. The oldest among them warned, "The Force is life, and life resists chains." But the young did not listen. They wanted proof. They wanted results. They wanted power. And so in quiet chambers deep beneath Tython, the first rituals began. Not prayers, experiments. They drew symbols in the dust, spoke the ancient tongue, and reached into the Force with their full strength. Some succeeded, bending energy, healing wounds, even moving through time for a breath. Others screamed and vanished, consumed by the same power they tried to command. The Jedi Council declared such acts forbidden. But it was too late. Curiosity had already become fire, and fire always finds something to burn. Far away in the cold of space, the Force trembled again. It had been touched, and it would never be the same. The first war in the galaxy did not begin with a blade. It began with a silence that should have spoken. On Tython, the Force had always been a guide, but now it became a weapon. Not by its own will, but through those who used it without understanding. The Jedi tried to contain it. They passed laws, built temples, banned teachings, but every restriction deepened the hunger they hoped to stop. Because what they feared, others desired. A Jedi named Dagon Locke broke the silence. He saw visions of war, temples burning, stars dying, a great shadow rising. He warned the council. They called him mad. He was exiled to Bogan, the moon of darkness. But there, his visions grew louder. He saw a future where Force wielders would rise not to serve, but to rule. He was not wrong. His warnings were buried. The council turned inward. Balance became dogma. Power became shame. But in secret, others began to study what he had seen. They asked, "If the Force gives strength, why must we fear it? If we are connected to all life, why should we not shape life itself?" These questions were not evil. They were born from frustration, from being told no by those who no longer remembered why. And then the exile broke free. Dagon Locke returned from Bogan, not as a madman, but as a prophet. He rallied others who felt cast aside. They were not dark, they were desperate. The Jedi tried to stop him, but for the first time, the Force was not a shield. It was a sword. Battle erupted across Tython, not between good and evil, but between fear and belief. The war was short, but its scars never healed. Dagon Locke was defeated. His name struck from the records. His followers scattered, but they had seen something the others refused to admit. The Force could be controlled, and control would always return. Generations passed. The Jedi became fewer. Their temples turned to stone. Their names faded into myth, and in time, a new order rose. They called themselves Jedi, children of Ashla. They would serve the light, reject attachment, and ban all paths that led to dominance. But in doing so, they repeated the oldest mistake. They silenced the other voice. Bogan was forgotten. Its students became outcasts, and the balance was broken. The Force did not speak. It remembered. In the shadows of forgotten worlds, in tombs carved beneath red sands, in minds too curious to be content, the fire returned. Not as a question, but as a promise. There would be more. More who listened, more who reached. And when they did, they would no longer ask for permission, because the Force had been heard, and what was once a spark was now a storm. They laid down their blades, not in surrender, but in purpose. From the ashes of the Jedi, the Jedi Order was born, not as rulers, but as guardians, not as conquerors. They stood in the light, children of Ashla, and they made one promise: to never again let balance break. The old world of Tython was left behind. In its place came Ossus, a world of forests, temples, and silence. There, the Jedi studied. They meditated. They served. Their blades, the newly crafted lightsabers, were not weapons of war. They were symbols of connection. Each crystal was chosen. Each hilt built by hand. The saber was not just a tool, it was a memory, a bond, a reflection of the one who carried it. They called themselves Jedi Knights now. But knighthood did not mean conquest. It meant sacrifice. It meant humility. It meant serving peace, not shaping it. For centuries they held the line. They acted only when needed. They refused titles, refused power, refused praise. They were monks first, warriors last. But the galaxy kept changing. Hyperlanes expanded. Governments formed. Civilizations collided. And with each new system came new dangers, warlords, raiders, merchants of fear. And each time, the Republic called the Jedi. Not to counsel, but to act. At first, they resisted. They were not soldiers. They were seekers of truth. But the cries of the innocent became louder. And silence began to feel like betrayal. So they stood again. The Jedi joined the Republic. Not as rulers, but as protectors. They did not seek command, but they were given it. But they were asked to enforce it. They did not write law. And slowly, without speaking it aloud, the Jedi began to change. They built more temples, Ossus, Ilum, Jeddah, Coruscant. Each one rose higher than the last. Each one promised wisdom. And each one, quietly, taught obedience. Younglings arrived from every system. Some were taken as infants their families never told. Others were offered as gifts, children born strong in the Force. They were trained without attachment, without love, without fear, or so the Jedi believed. But the Force does not vanish in silence. It waits. It remembers. And deep beneath their temples, within the hearts of those they trained, emotion remained. A Padawan would feel sorrow and be told to let go. A knight would feel pride and be told to breathe. And a master would feel fear, but call it wisdom. They did not see it yet. But the silence they had chosen was not peace. It was suppression. Their order had not become corrupt. Not yet. But something was shifting. The more they tried to preserve the light, the more they began to fear the dark. And fear, even when hidden behind robes and rituals, still whispers. The Jedi did not seek to lead. But power does not wait for permission. From Ossus to Jeddah, from Ilum to Coruscant, the Jedi temples became more than places of learning. They became symbols. Symbols of order. Symbols of peace. And slowly, symbols of control. The High Council moved to Coruscant. The Republic welcomed them with reverence. Chancellors bowed. Senators consulted them. And the Jedi, sworn to avoid attachment, became entangled in a political web they could not fully see. The temple on Coruscant rose above the city like a crown. Its spires pierced the sky. Its archives held thousands of years of galactic history. Its chambers echoed with voices not of debate, but of certainty. They wore peace like a uniform. They taught stillness like a rule. And behind the walls they made decisions that shaped entire systems, all in the name of balance. But balance once enforced becomes something else. The Jedi believed in detachment. They believed fear led to anger, and anger to suffering. So they taught children to suppress, not to understand. A child missed their family. The council said, "Let go." A knight questioned a mission. The masters said, "Trust the Force." And when the Force gave no answer, they gave silence. But wisdom became rigid. Knowledge deepened. But dissent grew quieter. They created the Barash Vow, a pledge of total isolation taken by Jedi who questioned too much. The archives grew. It was meant to be reflection. But for some, it became exile under another name. Still, the galaxy believed in them because they brought peace. They ended border conflicts, resolved planetary wars, negotiated with pirates, warlords, monarchs, and senators. Their methods were calm. Their presence brought silence. But in that silence, something stirred. Whispers that the Jedi served only the core worlds. Whispers among the outer rim. That they had become judges, not guardians. That they ignored suffering beyond the Republic's reach. And in some cases, those whispers were not wrong. There were systems that asked for help and were turned away. Species deemed too primitive to train. Cultures deemed too passionate to trust. The Jedi called it caution. Others called it arrogance. A line had been crossed, not in blood, but in belief. The Jedi still fought for peace, but they had begun to define peace on their own terms. The temples taught humility. But those within began to see themselves as the final word on truth. And truth, when held too tightly, becomes brittle, like glass. The Jedi did not see themselves falling. They were too careful, too disciplined, but the cracks had formed, not in their code, in their hearts. And across the stars, in the silence of forgotten worlds, others began to notice. There were those who had once stood beside the Jedi and left, those who questioned and were denied, those who felt the Force stir in ways the Council would not allow. They were watching, waiting, and one day they would return. Not to learn, but to confront, because even light can cast shadows. Her name is almost gone now, whispered in the archives of Ossus. Carved faintly into a wall deep beneath the temple on Jedha. A Jedi Master, a healer, a woman who once stood before the Council and refused to kneel. Not a surname. They called her Tayana Priest. Not a title, but a memory of the world she came from, a place that no longer exists on star maps. She was trained on Ilum. Her saber crystal was white, clear, quiet, without a chosen side. She did not fight in wars. She did not lead campaigns. She healed wounds of the body and wounds of the soul. She believed the Force did not punish. It understood. She would sit with younglings in silence, listening to the Force breathe through them. She taught that emotion was not the enemy. Only the fear of it was. But the Council disagreed. They said compassion must not become attachment, that love leads to fear, and fear leads to the dark. She said love was not possession. That detachment could become cruelty. They listened, they smiled, they said she was wise. And then they watched her fall. It began on a small moon near Vandor, a mining colony, forgotten, starving. A boy, no more than 7, had moved a landslide with his mind. The locals begged the Jedi to take him, but the Council saw danger. He had formed bonds. He had known fear. The child was older than allowed. They said no. Tayana Priest said yes. She returned with him in secret. Not in defiance. Trained him herself. In belief, the boy flourished. He laughed. He meditated. He never touched the dark. But when the Council discovered the truth, they saw only disobedience. They summoned her. They asked if she would surrender the boy. She said no. They asked if she would recant her teachings. She said no. They asked if she would leave the Order. She placed her saber on the floor and walked away. The boy cried, begged to follow. But she turned to him and said, "You are still light, stay in it, even when I am gone." And then she was gone. No exile, no trial, no violence. just silence. Her name was erased from most records. Her saber crystal locked away. The boy was retrained, reassigned, reshaped. He became a Jedi Master. He never spoke her name again. But in the quiet hours of the night, some students say they found him staring at the stars, crying. Tayana Priest vanished into history. Some say she returned to her homeworld. Some say she became a wanderer, helping the forgotten and the wounded. Others believe she died alone, far from any temple, with only the Force to witness her final breath. But her fall was not loud. It was not dark. It was not evil. It was a question the Jedi could not answer. What happens when love is punished? And why must silence be the price of compassion? The Order never spoke of her again, but her story lingered, not in the archives. In the cracks of glass temples, the Jedi did not fall overnight. They stood tall for thousands of years. But strength does not always protect from blindness. And sometimes, the brighter the light, the deeper the shadow behind it. As the Republic grew, so too did the responsibilities of the Jedi. They were called to mediate trade disputes, to calm planetary unrest, to police borders they did not draw, to serve systems they did not always understand. They said yes, every time, because they believed they were the balance. But slowly, they began to fear imbalance more than they feared war. They watched for signs of the dark side with growing suspicion. In the Outer Rim, they turned away from students whose emotions ran deep. On Ilum, they tightened the trials, filtering out those who questioned too much. And in the Temple, they spoke of prophecy, but not of warning. There were whispers of a chosen one who would bring balance to the Force. Some believed it was hope, others a threat, because prophecy is not guidance. It is control disguised as destiny. And when you begin to plan for destiny, you stop listening to the present. The Jedi Council became more cautious. But caution turned into rigidity. Debate turned into silence. And wisdom became fear. They began to believe that any connection to the dark, no matter how small, was a path to ruin. They taught children to guard their thoughts, to reject love, to fear anger, to sever grief, and they called it peace. But peace cannot exist where fear is law. The galaxy watched them. The Sith watched them. And the Force, alive, endless, and unseen, watched them. Because in secret, the dark side had not disappeared. It had learned. It had adapted. Where the Jedi enforced order, the Sith embraced chaos. Where the Jedi feared attachment, the Sith craved it. Where the Jedi punished emotion, the Sith fed on it. And in that feeding, something began to rise. Not in numbers, but in silence. A shadow cloaked in patience. A darkness that no longer screamed. It whispered, in the halls of the Senate, in the shadows of war, in the heart of the galaxy itself. The Jedi still stood in the light, but they had turned their backs to the dark, and so they never saw what was coming. Because pride does not always roar. Sometimes it wears robes. Sometimes it builds temples. Sometimes it looks like wisdom. And when that pride takes root, even the brightest light casts a shadow long enough to cover a galaxy. The halls of the Jedi Temple were silent. But silence is not peace. And beneath that silence, something ancient had begun to stir. Not in the Outer Rim, not in the darkness, but inside the Order itself. They were Jedi, trained in the ways of the light, bound to service, raised with restraint. But they asked questions, not about power. Why must the Force be divided? About truth. Why is knowledge of life and death forbidden? Why does the Council speak for the will of the Force when the Force speaks to all? These were not rebels. They were scholars, healers, warriors who had seen too much and understood too little. One of them was named Zendor. He was a master of great promise, a diplomat, a visionary, and he saw what others refused to see. That fear had begun to shape the Jedi Code. And fear, even when hidden behind wisdom, still grows. Zendor studied the Patentium, an ancient belief that the Force had no light or dark, only intention. He believed that darkness was not a path, but a choice. That knowledge could heal more than it harmed. But the Council said no. They forbade the teachings, closed the texts, silenced the discourse, and the Jedi who dared question were watched. Zendor was summoned. They asked him to abandon his path, to denounce what he had read, to return to obedience. He bowed, he walked out, and he never returned. Others followed, some in secret, some openly, not to defy the Jedi, but because they believed the Jedi had already defied themselves. They called themselves truth bringers. Not Sith, not yet, but they no longer followed the code. They trained in secret, explored abilities the Council had forbidden, mind manipulation, force healing beyond known limits, energy projection, and ancient forms of alchemy. And they paid the price. One by one, they were hunted. Some were slain, some were imprisoned, and others vanished. But the fire had been lit. A fracture split the Order, not from without, from within. And in the quiet moments between trials and meditations, the Jedi felt it. A tremor in the Force, a presence that was not dark, only denied. The temple walls remained tall. The code remained unchanged. But the memory of what had been forbidden, of what had been cast out, never faded. Because the Force remembers, and so do those who are cast aside. In the minds of the exiles, a truth began to take form. They were not traitors, they were pioneers. And if the Jedi would not let them walk the path of knowledge, then they would carve their own. Into blood, into stone, into legend. The Jedi called it the first great schism. But for those who lived it, it was not a schism. It was a war between belief and control, between what the Force could be and what it was allowed to be. Zendor and his followers had left the Order peacefully. But peace, once broken, is never truly silent again. The Jedi Council issued declarations. The Republic passed laws, and what began as doctrine became a battlefield. At first, the exiles tried to remain hidden. They built sanctuaries on distant worlds, Obria, Leto, Relg. They gathered artifacts, preserved ancient writings, studied powers the Jedi had buried beneath years of silence. But knowledge attracts fear, and the Jedi responded. They came in numbers, not with anger, but with certainty. The Order could not allow others to teach the Force without its blessing. It was not revenge. It was preservation. And so the exiles fought back, not out of hatred, out of survival. The battles were small at first. Duelists meeting in rain-swept ruins. Meditation halls burned to ash. Crystals shattered beneath lightsaber strikes. But the war grew. More Jedi began to question the Council. Some left quietly. Others turned on their own masters. The lines blurred, and the Force trembled. His lover, Arden Lyn, survived. Zendor died on Colonus, struck down in the final hour of a battle he never wanted. She vanished into the unknown regions with a weapon the Jedi had never seen, a gauntlet powered by the dark side, forged from forgotten technology. The Jedi believed it was over. They declared the heresy ended, the war forgotten, the exiles erased. But not all were dead, and those who lived remembered everything. They wandered the stars, wounded and bitter. They had no home, no order, no future, until they reached a system the Jedi had ignored. A place hidden beyond known space. A red world cloaked in death. Korriban. It was not empty. The Sith people had lived there for generations, red-skinned, Force-sensitive, tribal and ancient. They did not know the Jedi. They did not care for the Republic, but they worshipped strength. The Sith knelt, and when the exiles arrived, broken and burning with power, not out of submission, out of recognition, these were not invaders, these were gods. And so, the war ended. Not with peace. The exiles had fled justice, but with rebirth. But on Korriban, they found something else. A chance to become more than fallen Jedi. A chance to become something new. Korriban was not welcoming. It was dust and bone, a planet of endless storms and valleys lined with tombs. But for the exiles, it was salvation. They had fled across unknown stars, carrying nothing but memory and power, and they had expected to die in exile. Instead, they were crowned. The Sith species were strong in the Force, primitive, yes, but attuned. They had no Jedi code, no fear of emotion, no fear of death. They believed power was proof, and the exiles were powerful. The two cultures did not clash. They merged. The exiles taught the Sith new forms of the Force, how to shape it, how to weaponize it, how to consume it, worship. And the Sith gave the exiles something the Jedi never had. The union was not peaceful. It was violent, but it was willing. The strongest among the exiles took Sith wives and husbands. They ruled not by birthright, but by strength. And from their bloodlines, a new order was born. They called themselves lords. No longer heretics, just lords. No longer Jedi. And Korriban changed with them. The tombs grew deeper. The pyramids rose higher. They carved knowledge into stone, not to share but to guard. Secrets became currency. Rituals became weapons. The dark side was no longer forbidden. It was sacred, not because it was evil, but because it was free. They did not ask the Force to speak. They commanded it, and the Force listened. Among the early lords, one name rose above the rest. Ajunta Pulse, once a master in the Jedi Temple. He did not wear armor. Now the first Dark Lord of the Sith. He wore robes stained with red clay. His lightsaber glowed a deep, unnatural crimson, the first of its kind, bled from a crystal that once shone blue. Ajunta did not conquer Korriban. He was chosen by it. He taught that the Force was a blade, not a chain. That emotion was a source of strength, not a path to ruin. And that death was not the end. But power has its cost. The Sith Empire grew quickly. Its teachings spread. Its rituals deepened. But so did its divisions. Each lord craved more. More knowledge. More followers. More immortality. And Korriban became both cradle and tomb. Ajunta Pul, old and weary, watched as the empire he built began to fracture. He died in sorrow, his body entombed beneath a monument of silence. But his legacy remained. The Sith Empire had no senate, no council, no code, only ambition, only will, only power. And in its red soil, the galaxy's oldest darkness took root. They had been exiled, hunted, erased, but now they had become something more. Something the Jedi feared, even if they refused to speak the name. Sith. The word did not mean evil. Not yet. It meant identity. It meant home. And for the fallen Jedi who had once stood in temples of light, it meant revenge without war, vindication without apology. They did not destroy the Republic. They did not march on Coruscant. Not yet. They built in silence, in shadows, The Sith Empire stretched beyond Korriban, to Xios, to Malachor, to the red moons of the Outer Rim. Each world held a new temple. Each temple held a new secret, and within each secret, a new wound in the Force. The lords who followed Ajunta Pulse did not agree on vision, but they agreed on purpose. Power, not for peace, not for balance, but for survival and for legacy. Among them was Tulak Hord, the greatest lightsaber duelist of his time. He carved his teachings into holocrons that burned with dark energy. Beside him rose Karnas Mur, who twisted the Force into plague and pain, bending life itself into tools of control. They were not madmen. They were architects. And their order was no longer reaction, it was design. The Jedi meditated. The Sith transformed. The Jedi served peace. The Sith forged power. And in every ritual, the past echoed. They remembered Ossus. They remembered exile. They remembered standing before the council and being told no. So they built a legacy where no one would be denied. But entry had a price. To rise among the Sith was not a matter of faith. It was survival. Masters were not mentors. They were obstacles. Apprentices were not students. They were successors waiting with sharpened blades. And through this endless trial, the Sith grew stronger. The Force changed with them, not as punishment, because the Force remembers pain as reflection, and the Sith had given it plenty. Every lord believed they were the future, but even among themselves, they began to fracture. Every apprentice dreamed of a new empire. The Jedi believed they had peace, and Korriban, once a sanctuary, became a stage for betrayal. The Sith knew better. Peace is a pause, and in that pause, shadows were born. Deep, patient, unseen. The Sith were no longer exiles. They were no longer students. They were a mirror the Jedi refused to look into, a scar on the galaxy that would never heal. Not because they had fallen, but because they had built something powerful. From the silence of rejection, he ruled for a century. Without mercy, without weakness, without question, he took it. Marka Ragnos was not born to rule the Sith Empire, and the galaxy never forgot his name. He stood over 2 meters tall, draped in ancient Sith armor lined with gold, his face hidden behind a death mask that had not left his skin in decades. His saber staff burned with dark energy, but it was not his weapon the people feared. It was his silence. Ragnos did not speak often. When he did, planets listened. He rose to power during a time of blood and chaos, the Sith Lords fighting amongst themselves after centuries of fragile peace. Each believed they were chosen. Each fell beneath his blade. When the last rival was buried beneath the Valley of the Dark Lords, Ragnos claimed the title no Sith had ever held uncontested. Dark Lord of the Sith. His rule was not law. It was absolute will. He did not govern from a throne. He ruled from Korriban, the world of tombs, where the dead whispered in stone and the living carved history with pain. The empire he shaped was vast, but it was not unified by borders. It was bound by fear. And fear, in the hands of the Sith, was power. Under Ragnos, the Sith built monuments taller than cities. They enslaved species across the Outer Rim, using alchemy to twist them into new forms. The Masasi, the Tukseta, beasts of war, bred not for victory, but for terror. The teachings of the ancient lords, Ajunta Pul, Tulak Hord, Karnas Mur, were no longer hidden. They were doctrine. Ragnos believed the dark side was not just a tool, it was a path to transcendence. He taught that death was not final. That power could live on through spirits, through relics, through ritual. He encouraged his followers to build tombs, not for rest, but for return. And many of them did. The Sith no longer feared the end. They welcomed it, because they believed they would rise again. But beneath this golden age of blood and silence, something darker brewed. The lords beneath Ragnos obeyed, but they did not forget what they wanted: power. And even Ragnos, mighty as he was, could not rule forever. In his final years he grew distant. He spoke to ghosts no one else could hear. He wandered the catacombs of Korriban alone, speaking in languages lost to time. And then he vanished. Some say he died in his sleep. Others say he performed a ritual to leave his body behind. But on the day his body was burned, the sky over Korriban turned black for 3 days. Lightning struck the Valley of the Dark Lords, and every Sith in the Empire felt something shift. The throne was empty, the silence was broken, and the empire he forged in fire was about to turn on itself. And Marka Ragnos, the God King of the Sith, had left behind only one legacy, because the dark side rewards ambition. Whoever is strong enough will take everything. When Marka Ragnos fell, he left behind no heir, no chosen one, no successor, only a throne carved from black stone and the promise of war. 2 Sith rose to claim it. He worshipped Ragnos as the perfect example of Sith order. Ludo Kresh, a traditionalist, a cautious lord who believed in the strength of isolation. To him, power was meant to be preserved, not unleashed. And Naga Sado, a visionary, a sorcerer of deception and fire. He believed the Sith were destined to rule more than the Outer Rim. He dreamed of conquest, of open war against the Republic that had long forgotten the exiled Jedi who became gods. Their rivalry was immediate. They stood at the tomb of Ragnos, surrounded by Sith followers, warriors, slaves, and spirits. His spirit, vast, glowing with wrath, appeared between them. And in death, Marka Ragnos returned. The air trembled with darkness. Only a warning. Only one of you will lead, and your empire will burn. He gave no answer. Then he was gone. The others took sides. Kresh had the support of the old blood, lords who feared change. Sado drew the young, the bold, the hungry. But Sado did not wait. He moved in secret. He staged an attack on Korriban, making it appear as if the Republic had struck first. He used illusions, false fleets, manipulated witnesses, all to provoke the Sith into war. It worked. With righteous fury, the Sith crowned Sado Dark Lord. And Kresh was cast aside. Sado fled to his fortress on the moon of Kar Delba, where he prepared for a war the galaxy did not yet know was coming. There he performed alchemical rituals that twisted the Force itself. He bent solar energies into weapons, created massive battle meditations to control fleets across systems. He even placed his physical body in a meditation sphere, allowing him to wage war while detached from the battlefield entirely. When the Republic learned of the threat, it was too late. Sado launched his invasion. A Sith fleet emerged from hyperspace, fire burning in every engine trail. Planets fell. Jedi temples were attacked. Republic outposts shattered. Entire systems surrendered without resistance, paralyzed by fear. But the attack was unstable. Not because of the Republic, because of Sado Set's ambition. He overextended. His illusion began to fracture. His control weakened. And in that fracture, Kresh returned. He had faked his death, waited, watched. Then, when Sado's forces were scattered, Kresh struck. His fleet attacked Sado's forces above Kar Delba in a surprise ambush. The 2 Sith Lords battled in orbit, their ships, their minds, their wills, but only barely. Sado won. His fleet was crippled, his armies in disarray, his enemies closing in. The Republic had recovered. The Jedi had organized. The war turned. Sado abandoned the campaign. He destroyed his own decoy ships to cover his retreat. He killed his own Massassi to preserve his legacy. And he fled, not to Korriban, but to the jungles of Yavin 4. There he vanished into legend. The Sith Empire collapsed. Its golden age ended, its worlds abandoned, but its power remained. Hidden, waiting, because ambition never dies. It only buries itself until it can rise again. Centuries passed. The Sith Empire was gone. Its temples stood empty. Its tombs were sealed, and the galaxy believed the darkness had finally ended. But the Force does not forget. It waits in stone, in whispers, in those who dare to listen. Far from Korriban, on the world of Onderon, a Jedi Knight named Freeden Nad began to question everything. He was brilliant, patient, powerful, admired by the Order. But he was unsatisfied. He sought mastery, not peace. He felt the Force call to him in ways the Council could not explain. The Jedi taught him that power must serve balance. But he wanted to understand balance, to see what lay beyond it. When the Council refused his request for deeper knowledge of the dark side, he left the temple, not in defiance. In pursuit, he traveled alone into the unknown regions, guided by visions of fire and shadow. For years he searched through ruins, through grave worlds, through storms of forgotten energy, until he found it. Korriban. The red sands were silent when he arrived, but he could feel them watching. The air was heavy. The tombs hummed beneath the surface. And then he heard a voice, not from the living, but from the dead. It was Naga Sado. His spirit had survived. Not by accident, by will. Sado promised Nad what the Jedi never could, true mastery of both life and death. He revealed ancient secrets, rituals that could twist the Force itself, and Freeden Nad listened. He learned quickly. He grew powerful beyond measure. His saber burned darker, heavier, alive with hatred and control. He told himself it was not evil, it was knowledge, but knowledge without restraint always hungers. When his training was complete, Nad walked to Sado's tomb. He knelt. He thanked his master, and then he destroyed him. The spirit of Naga Sado screamed, fading into the void. Nad had learned everything he needed. He would serve no one. He returned to Onderon with the wisdom of 1,000 dead Sith, and he brought the darkness with him. At first he ruled quietly, guiding, advising, manipulating the royal court. But power grows loud. Within decades he declared himself king. The people worshipped him. Those who opposed him disappeared. And those who followed him were gifted with fragments of his knowledge, Force rituals, forbidden arts and blood magic that bound families to his will. Onderon became a fortress of the dark side. Even in death, Nad refused to vanish. When he died, his body was entombed within the royal mausoleum of Freeden Nad, where his spirit continued to whisper to his descendants. And his descendants listened. His bloodline gave rise to new kings and queens. His teachings corrupted entire generations. From the tombs of Korriban to the cities of Onderon, a single truth began to echo again. The Sith had not been destroyed. They had simply changed their face. Because darkness does not always wear armor. Sometimes it wears a crown. And on Onderon, the name of Freeden Nad would become both a curse and a prophecy. The Jedi would come again. They would cleanse his tomb. They would think the evil was gone. But they would be wrong, because his spirit remained. Watching, whispering, waiting, for someone strong enough to hear him again. The Sith Empire fell. Its fleets turned to dust. Its lords were buried in stone. But the fire never went out. Power, once born, cannot be unmade. It only waits, changing form, changing name, changing hands. After Freedom Nad, the dark side spread in silence, not through armies but through legacies. His teachings infected Onderon, then Dantooine, then beyond. Fragments of Sith knowledge were smuggled, hidden, copied in secret. The Jedi destroyed what they could. But every artifact they shattered, every tomb they sealed, only deepened the hunger. A student. And then, from that silence came one who listened. A warrior. A man who would turn the galaxy to ash. Exar Kun. He had been trained on Dantooine, a gifted Jedi, brilliant and bold. But he asked the same questions Nad once had. He wanted more. He was warned. He was told to stop. So he kept going. Followed them. He uncovered Nad's teachings. And on the jungle moon of Yavin 4, he fell. The spirit of Freedom Nad reached out from the dark, and Kun reached back. Their bond was not of trust. It was of use. Conan devoured the old knowledge and cast Nad aside, just as Nad had done to Sado. And once again the Sith were reborn, not as a race, not as an empire, but as an idea. An idea wrapped in hatred. An idea built from ashes. Exar Kun declared war. Alongside his fallen ally, Ulic Keldroma, he launched a crusade that shattered systems. They stormed Jedi temples, twisted students into assassins, raised monuments in fire. It was not just war, it was revenge. For every exile, every name erased from history, every silence. But the fire still burned too hot. Kun was destroyed. Keldroma surrendered. And again, the Jedi believed the dark was gone. But they misunderstood something vital. The Sith did not live in armies. They lived in secrets. And one day a new lord would find those secrets. Not on Korriban. Not on Yavin. A man who would watch the history of Sith empires collapse again and again, but in the spaces between forgotten tombs and forbidden texts, and decide that weakness must end. His name was Darth Bane. But that is another story. This story, the story of Marka Ragnos Naga Sado Freedom Nad, is the story of the second level of Sith power, where destruction is not a side effect, but the purpose. It is where ambition becomes law. These were not men who lost control. They were men who embraced it. And in doing so, they created the blueprint for every darkness that followed. Not just in temples, not just in battles, but in hearts. Because the Sith did not fall. They spread. And the fire they lit on Korriban never died. The war began in silence. Not from peace, but from hesitation. The Mandalorians rose from the Outer Rim, ancient warriors bound by creed, their armor forged in fire and history. They did not conquer for greed. They conquered because it was their way. A test of strength. A ritual of war. World after world fell. The Republic pleaded for help, and the Jedi Council watched. They said the will of the Force was unclear. That intervention might unbalance the galaxy. That patience was wisdom. But on the front lines, patience looked like death. Among the Jedi who watched worlds burn was a young knight named Revan. Brilliant, fearless, and impatient. He was everything the Council feared in a leader, too charismatic, too curious, too willing to decide what the Force meant, rather than wait for it to speak. Steady. He was loyal. At his side stood his closest friend, Alec, and he believed in Revan with a devotion that would one day destroy him. Together they defied the Council. They gathered followers, Jedi who could not stand by while civilians burned. They called themselves the Revengists. They were not dark. They were desperate. They joined the Republic fleet and entered the war the Council had forbidden. The Mandalorians welcomed them. For the first time in centuries, they faced worthy enemies. The galaxy became a forge, and Revan became its flame. He studied his foes. He learned their codes, their tactics, their psychology. He began to predict their moves before they made them. Some said he could see the battle unfold before it began, that the Force itself bent around his mind. The Republic hailed him as a hero. The soldiers followed him without question. Even the Jedi who stayed behind began to whisper his name. But something had begun to change. Each victory brought new doubt. Each loss brought new fury. Revan began to see war not as chaos, but as clarity. He told himself the Council was wrong, that the Force did not demand stillness, it demanded action. That peace was not the absence of war, but the result of strength. Alec followed him faithfully. He called him Revan the Savior. But in time, he would call him something else. Malak. Revan's campaign pushed deep into Mandalorian space. Every battle hardened him. Every death etched new lines into his mind. He no longer sought peace. He sought an end. The war reached its climax at Malachor V, a world steeped in darkness, drawn to death like a wound in the Force. The Mandalorians made their last stand there, believing victory would redeem their honor. Revan saw something else. He saw destiny. Against the advice of his generals, he deployed the Mass Shadow Generator, a weapon of unthinkable power, capable of crushing ships and soldiers alike under their own gravity. When it activated, the world screamed. The Mandalorian fleet was annihilated. The Republic's own forces were torn apart. The surface of Malachor split open, swallowing millions. And in that moment, the war ended. The Mandalorians surrendered. Their leader, Mandalore the Ultimate, was defeated in single combat, his mask stripped away by Revan's hand. But victory did not bring peace. Something happened in the ruins of that world, something Revan never spoke of. Some say he found a relic. Others say he heard a voice. Whatever it was, he did not return the same. Malachor had changed him. The darkness there had whispered a truth the Jedi refused to teach. That power was the only constant. That mercy was weakness. And that the Force was not balance, it was survival. When Revan returned from the Outer Rim, he was still a hero. But the man who stepped out of his starship was no longer just a Jedi. He was something the galaxy had never seen before. A savior with the eyes of a conqueror. The war was over, but the peace that followed was hollow. Revan returned from the Outer Rim a victor, the greatest Jedi general of his time, the man who ended the Mandalorian Wars. The Republic praised him. The people worshipped him. Even those who had once doubted him now called him savior. But Revan said nothing. He did not return to Coruscant. He did not answer the Council Sep's summons. He vanished. With him went his fleet, thousands of warships, legions of soldiers, and Jedi who no longer trusted the Order that had abandoned them in the war. They followed him willingly. Because they believed in him more than they believed in the Force. And deep in the unknown regions, something found him. Legends speak of an ancient Sith empire that still survived there, hidden for millennia since the time of Naga Sadow. A world of storms and fire, ruled by a shadow no one could name, the true Sith Emperor, Vitiate. Revan and his followers never stood a chance. They were captured, broken and rebuilt, corrupted, their minds twisted by rituals older than the Republic itself. When Revan returned, he wore a mask, the same one taken from the corpse of Mandalore. He never removed it again. Beside him stood his friend, Alec, now called Darth Malak. They came back as Sith Lords. They claimed the Outer Rim in weeks. Worlds that had once cheered their names now burned beneath their fleets. The Jedi who had fought beside them were forced to choose, die as heroes or kneel as servants. The Jedi Civil War had begun. But this was not war as the galaxy knew it. This was something else, controlled, deliberate, almost ritualistic. Revan Dest's new empire was not built on chaos. It was built on order. Every conquest had purpose. Every strike weakened the Republic and something far greater beyond it. He believed he was saving the galaxy again, uniting it through fear before the true Sith could return. But his means became his undoing. He executed Jedi without emotion. He enslaved planets to feed his fleet. He turned the mass shadow generator into a symbol, repeating Malachor's horror across 1,000 systems. Malak followed, but he did not understand. He saw only power. Where Revan sought control, Malak sought destruction. And their bond, once friendship, began to fracture. They were no longer brothers. They were reflections of the same wound, drawn deeper into the dark by the same lie they had once fought against. That strength was the only way to end suffering. Revan's fleet spread across the galaxy like a plague. He struck the Republic's supply lines, its shipyards, its worlds of culture and memory. Alderaan, Durau, Sirako, each fell in silence. Each was erased. The Jedi Council named him an enemy of the Order. He had acted, but in secret, some still admired him. Because Revan had done what they could not. And that was the cruelest truth. It was about belief. The war was no longer about the Mandalorians. It was about faith. And it was about the line between savior and tyrant. Revan had crossed it. But he never noticed when. Because in his mind, the galaxy was already broken, and he was simply reshaping it. The Jedi called him lost. The Republic called him traitor, but to Malak, Revan was still his master. And that was the problem. For years they fought side by side, the Dark Lord and his apprentice, their armies spreading across the core worlds, their war machines fueled by the wreckage of fallen civilizations. But something had begun to change. In Revan's silence, Malak heard doubt. In Revan's calm, he saw weakness. He wanted more. He wanted to rule, not serve. Their war reached its height above the world of Darth Revan's flagship as the Jedi finally made their move. A strike team led by Bastila Shan, a young Jedi gifted with battle meditation, infiltrated the ship during a final assault. Malak saw his chance. As the Jedi boarded the vessel, he turned his cannons toward his master's bridge. He fired. The explosion tore through the ship, splitting it in half. Malak declared Revan dead. And in the chaos that followed, he took command. But Revan did not die. The Force refused to let him. Bastila found him among the wreckage, broken, unconscious, his mask shattered beside him. She felt something the Council had long forgotten, pity. She reached through the Force and touched his mind, and rewrote it. The man who had been Revan was gone. In his place stood a soldier with no name, no memory, and no past. He was taken to the Jedi enclave on Dantooine, where the Masters made a decision that would haunt them forever. They would not kill him. They would reshape him. They would make him believe he had never fallen. He was given a name, given a purpose, given a uniform. And so the greatest Dark Lord of the age became a servant once more, a servant of the very order he had tried to destroy. Malak, unchecked, unleashed horrors the galaxy had not seen since the time of Naga Sadow. The war continued. He bombarded entire planets from orbit. He enslaved civilians to build weapons. He turned captured Jedi into soldiers of the dark. The Republic began to collapse. And in the shadows, Revan, now reborn as a nameless soldier, began to dream. He saw flashes of battles he could not remember. A world of red sand. A mask in the fire. A name whispered in the dark. Revan. The Force was calling him back. It began as memory, then as instinct, and finally, as destiny. He joined Bastila in her mission to hunt down the Dark Lord. He fought alongside Jedi and soldiers who had once feared his name, unaware that he was the monster they sought. But the Force remembers. And it was not finished with him. On the ancient world of Lilon, the truth returned. In the heart of the Starforge, the machine that had powered his war, Revan remembered everything. His victories, his betrayals, his fall, and his pain. But he also remembered why he had done it. He had not wanted to destroy the Republic. He had wanted to save it from the darkness he had seen beyond the Rim, from the true Sith. He turned to Bastila, no longer lost. He faced Malak, no longer divided. And in the battle that followed, Apprentice met Master one final time. Malak fought with rage. Revan fought with purpose. And in the end, the one who had once fired upon his master knelt before him again, dying. Malak's final words were not defiance, they were sorrow. He said he envied Revan, because even in all his darkness, Revan had never truly stopped fighting for something greater. And when Malak died, Revan did not feel victory, only silence. The same silence that had started the war. The same silence that still waited beyond the stars. Revan came back, but he did not return whole. Some wounds do not bleed. They echo. The Jedi called it redemption. The Republic called it a miracle. But the Force knew better. He had seen too much. He had known too much. And though he had turned away from the darkness, part of him still understood it, loved it, even because it had given him clarity that the light never could. After the defeat of Malak, Revan vanished once more. He left behind the Republic he had saved, the woman who had saved him, and the Order that had tried to erase him. He went into the unknown regions, chasing the same whisper that had led him there before. The Council begged him to stay. Bastila pleaded for him to rest. But he could not. He had felt the presence of something greater than both light and dark, something that had corrupted him long before his fall. He needed to face it, to end it. Because he had learned the truth of the galaxy. Peace was never natural. It was borrowed. And sooner or later, the one who lent it would come to collect. So he went back, not as a savior, not as a Sith, as a man who could no longer stop fighting. In the depths of wild space, he found the ancient Sith Empire once more. The true Sith. The shadow that had waited since the days of Naga Sadow and Marka Ragnas. And there Revan disappeared from history. Some say he was captured by the Emperor. Some say he fought him and lost. Others believe he became part of the darkness itself, his mind divided between two loyalties, never choosing either. But the truth was quieter. Revan's soul was torn in two, light and dark, hope and despair, trapped in eternal struggle. Not because of what he had done, but because of what he could not undo. His name became myth. His story became a lesson whispered by Jedi Masters to Padawans, who never understood the man behind the mask. To the Jedi, he was the example of how even the greatest can fall. To the Sith, he was proof that power can be reclaimed again and again. And to the Force, he was neither. He was balance, not perfect, not pure, but painfully human. Centuries later, when his spirit resurfaced in the days of the Old Republic, he no longer cared for empires or codes. He sought only one thing, peace. But peace never came. When he finally fell for the last time, his body died in silence. His spirit lingered, divided, half bound to the light, guiding, half chained to the dark, haunting. Because betrayal never truly leaves. It lingers in memory, in scars, in choices that were never meant to be made. Revan had been betrayed by the Jedi who refused to act, by the Sith who claimed to follow him, by the Force itself which had used him for balance and then discarded him. But his greatest betrayal was of himself. He had believed he could control war, that he could save through strength, that he could fight the dark by becoming it. the one within. And though he won 1,000 battles, he lost the only one that ever mattered. In the centuries that followed, the name Revan became legend. Some prayed to him, some feared him, but none understood him. And perhaps that was always the destiny of the one they called the Heart of Betrayal. Because he was not a warning, he was a reflection of what happens when faith becomes pride, when purpose becomes obsession, and when love becomes sacrifice. A man who saved the galaxy twice and never found peace once. The battle at Malachor V ended a war, but it opened something far worse. The mass shadow generator had shattered the planet. Millions of lives were extinguished in an instant. Their screams did not vanish. They stayed, trapped in the Force, in the dust, in the silence. The Jedi who survived the Mandalorian Wars returned to a galaxy that no longer recognized them. Some had followed Revan and now carried the stain of his war. Others had stayed behind and watched the Order fracture. But all of them felt it, a thinning, a quiet horror beneath the surface. Like the Force itself had been wounded, and it had. It created a void, a place where the Force screamed endlessly but could no longer be heard. The detonation at Malachor did more than break a world. It was not the dark side. It was something deeper. Emptiness. Those who entered it felt their connection to the Force unravel. Some went mad. But from that void, something began to grow. Others simply disappeared. It was not power. It was not ambition. It was pain. And pain is patient. 3 would emerge from this shadow. Not as Sith in the tradition of Revan or the ancient lords of Korriban, but as something new. They were not warriors. They were not emperors. They were survivors. Each one a reflection of the galaxy's broken spine. Each one a scar on the Force that refused to heal. They would become known as the Triumvirate, 3 Sith Lords who did not conquer the galaxy with fleets or planets, but by tearing the soul from within it. Darth Nihilus, Darth Sion, Darth Traya. They came from nothing, and they gave the galaxy something worse. Not fear, not oppression, but the feeling that the Force, once a living presence, had abandoned everyone. The Jedi were hunted, not for power, but for silence. Entire enclaves vanished. Dantooine, KOTOR, Telos. Dozens of masters, knights and Padawans, erased not by blade but by absence. It was not death, it was forgetting. And the Triumvirate thrived in that forgetting. They did not build an empire. They ruled from the shadows of what Revan left behind, the ruins of Treyas Academy on Malachor V. A place soaked in betrayal, in failure, in endless echo. There were no students, only wounds, and they fed on them. The galaxy did not fear them, because the galaxy barely knew they existed. But the Jedi knew, because they were dying, one by one. Not from battle, but from disconnection. The Force was slipping away, and those who remained alive could not explain why. It was as if something in the galaxy had turned, not a shift, a rejection. Like the Force itself had looked at what its children had become and shut its eyes. In that blindness the Triumvirate rose, not as kings, but as consequences. They were not the Sith the galaxy feared. They were the Sith the Force could not stop, because they had already died, and chose to keep living. He had no face, no voice, no breath, only hunger. Not even those who served him. The galaxy called him Darth Nihilus, but no one truly knew what he was. His presence could not be sensed through the Force. It was absence, cold, unnatural. He did not walk, he drifted. He did not speak, he reached. But he was not born a monster. And when he reached planets, died. He was born a wound. When the mass shadow generator tore gravity apart, it did the same to him. He stood at Malachor Vive when the world broke open. He should have died. Instead, something within him refused. Not his body, his need. The force shattered around him. His identity was consumed in an instant. He became pain without name, a soul without anchor, a hollow scream wrapped in robes. He had no memory of who he was before, only what he had become. Hunger. It gnawed at him, endlessly, violently. A hunger not for food, but for life itself, for the Force. He learned to feed. At first, slowly, a single creature. A Jedi in meditation, a group of pilgrims too quiet to resist. Then, a temple, a city, and then the world of KOTOR. A colony of Miraluka, Force sensitives who saw only through its flow. He consumed all of them in a moment. Thousands. Only one survived. A woman named Visas Ma. She awoke surrounded by ash and silence. Her people gone. Her home erased. And before her stood the one who had done it. He did not kill her. He made her look at him. Not a man. And in that moment, she felt what he truly was. Not a Sith, but a wound in the galaxy so deep, it could never close. He took her as his apprentice, not to teach, to bind. Through her, he saw the galaxy more clearly, not through light or dark, but through weakness. Every Jedi, every planet, every being that touched the Force called to him, and he answered with death. He consumed what the Sith had once sought to control. He did not rule, he devoured. The other lords feared him. Even Darth Vader, his own teacher, knew he had passed beyond understanding. To study him. She tried to leash him, to use his hunger. But hunger cannot be caged. And Nihilus was no longer a mind to reason with. He betrayed her, cast her from power, and continued his silent crusade against all life. His ship, the Ravager, drifted like a ghost, crewed by the dead and the dying. It was not built. It was held together by the Force alone, by his will. But even that will was fading, because the more he consumed, the more he lost. He had no face because he had no self. He had no voice because he had no soul. Only a scream that once had a name. And that scream was all that remained. It was a Jedi exile, one who had also stood at Malachor and lived. When he finally faced his end, it was not at the hands of armies. One who had also been broken. They confronted him not with power, but with understanding, because they too had felt the wound. They too had seen what happens when the Force is silenced. And as Nihilus fell, his body unraveled, not into blood, but into darkness. There was no scream, only quiet. And then, nothing. He did not die. He ceased, because there was never anything left to save, only hunger. He could not die, and that was his curse. He simply refused to end. The galaxy called him Darth Sion, the Lord of Pain. But he was never meant to be immortal. His flesh was shattered, his bones splintered. Every nerve screamed every second of his life. Yet he lived, not through medicine, not through the Force as others knew it, pure, endless, consuming hatred, but through hatred. He had been a warrior once, a fallen Jedi, broken in the Mandalorian Wars. He fought at Malachor Vive and felt the planet tear itself apart. He died there. And yet he rose. The dark energy of that place filled the cracks in his body like molten iron. The pain bound his bones tighter than muscle ever could. His consciousness fused with agony itself. He learned that pain could keep him alive. That suffering could become will. And so, he never stopped suffering. Every scar was a chain. Every breath was defiance. Every heartbeat was an act of rage. He became stronger not by healing, but by refusing to die. At first he wandered the ruins of Malachor, lost between death and survival. He killed anything that moved, desperate to feel something other than agony. But the pain never left him. It became his only companion, his only truth. Then he found her, Darth Vader. The woman who had once been a Jedi Master, Kriya, had come to Malachor seeking understanding of the wound that had torn the Force. She found Sion instead. He attacked her. She did not fight back. She only asked him one question. Why do you still live? He struck her again and again, but she did not fall. She only repeated the question, until finally, in exhaustion, he realized he did not know the answer. And in that moment, she saw what he truly was. Not strength, not immortality, but despair made flesh. She taught him how to control it, how to focus his pain, how to weaponize his suffering. He became her blade, her enforcer, her executioner. For years he served her, hunting Jedi across the galaxy. His presence alone was terror. Because he did not fight to win. He fought to feel. Every strike against him only made him stronger. Every wound fed him. The more he was broken, the more his hatred burned. And the Jedi, who had long since forgotten what pain meant, could not stop him. But Traya was not loyal, nor was Sion. Their bond was one of use, not devotion. When Nihilists turned on their teacher, Sion followed. He cast her out of the Sith triumvirate, betrayed her without hesitation. He told himself it was strength, but it was fear. Because she had seen the truth that pain was not power. It was prison. Without her, he continued his path of death. He hunted the last Jedi, slaughtering those who remained after the Purge. And in time, he met the one who would end him. The exile. The same being who had survived Malachor, who had walked through the wound and lived. They fought in the heart of the Traya's Academy, where all things broken eventually return. Blades clashed. The air burned. The echoes of 1,000 deaths screamed through the stone. But no strike could kill him. No blade could end what was already dead. Until the exiles spoke. They told him the truth Traya had seen long before. Not with power, with understanding. That his immortality was not strength. It was fear. The fear to let go. The fear to be forgotten. The fear to die. And in that moment, Sion's Sith's will faltered. His pain, which had kept him alive for so long, began to unravel. He looked at his enemy and saw peace. He had not felt that word in centuries, so he closed his eyes. And for the first time, he wanted it. And the Force, the same Force he had cursed, finally took him. His body collapsed to ash. His pain dissolved into silence. And the man who could not die, finally did. A Jedi Master. Her name was once Kriya, a philosopher, a teacher. But titles break easily in a galaxy built on war. She trained Revan, guided him in the early days before his fall. But when Revan became Darth Revan, the Council turned on her. She believed in questioning the Force, in thinking beyond the code. They exiled her for what her student became. They did not blame the war, they blamed the teacher. So she left, not in shame, in silence, seeking not revenge but understanding. She wandered the Outer Rim, alone in thought. And on the dead world of Malachor V, she found it. There she became something else. In the silence that screamed louder than war. In the wound that still bled through the Force. Not Sith, not Jedi. Something in between. She called herself Darth Vader, the Lord of Betrayal. But her betrayal was not cruelty. It was truth. She believed the Force itself had failed the galaxy. that it used people like tools, lifting some, breaking others, and calling it balance. She had seen heroes fall. She had seen tyrants rise. And in every cycle, the Force remained untouched. So she chose to break it. Nihilus, Scion. She built the Triumvirate not as an empire, but as a wound. Two monsters of her making, avatars of hunger and pain. She believed they would unmake the Jedi, destroy the Sith, and force the Force to reveal its true nature. They follow instinct. But monsters do not follow visions. They betrayed her, cast her out, left her for dead in the same place they were born, Malachor V. Yet she did not die. Because her lesson was not finished, she found another exile. Another Jedi cast out by the Council, a general who had fought at Malachor and returned with the same silence in their soul. She taught them not how to use the Force, but how to hear it again. Not in commands, in echoes. She taught them that belief without thought is slavery. That faith without understanding is just obedience in disguise. And in time, that exile, the Jedi who had once severed themselves from the Force, became her final student. Together they hunted down the broken remains of her triumvirate, not to conquer, to end the lesson. Nihilus was silenced. Scion was released. And in the end, Traya returned to Malachor, alone. There, in the Traya's core, she waited for her student one last time. Not as Sith or Jedi. They met not as enemies, but as two beings who had suffered the same wound. She spoke of the Force, of how it manipulates history, chooses heroes, condemns worlds. She called it a lie. But her student had learned something different, that the Force is not a voice. It is a mirror. It reflects what is within. And perhaps the pain was not because the Force had failed, but because the people who touched it never understood how to carry it. They fought, not for victory, for closure. And when Darth Traya fell, it was not with rage. It was with peace. Her final words were not curses. They were questions. She asked her student what would come next, what they would choose, what they would teach. Because that was always her truth, that nothing matters more than the lessons we leave behind. She died alone, but not forgotten. Because she was not a villain, not a tyrant, not a savior. She was the last voice of a broken order, a woman who looked at the galaxy and dared to ask, what if everything we believe is wrong? And in that question, she left a legacy deeper than power. She left a wound that made others think. And sometimes, that is the most dangerous kind of power of all. He was not born in power. He was born in dirt. On the outer rim world of Epatros, a mining colony carved into the skin of a dead world, a boy named Dessel grew up knowing only pain. His father beat him. The mines broke him. The Republic ignored him. And the Force, though he did not yet understand it, whispered one promise: survive. He learned early that strength was not cruelty. It was endurance. Every day in the Cortosis mines was a battle between life and collapse. The dust filled his lungs. The dark filled his mind. And hatred, quiet, constant, became the only thing that felt alive. When he killed his father, it was not anger. It was inevitability. A moment of clarity. A glimpse of control in a life that had never offered him any. And from that moment on, he stopped apologizing for survival. He joined the Republic Army during the New Sith Wars, fighting under a name that no longer belonged to a boy. His comrades called him Bane. It was meant as an insult. He was not a soldier who fought for cause. He made it a title. He fought because it was all he knew, the rhythm of command, the simplicity of victory. But his instincts set him apart. He saw patterns no one else could see. He moved before orders arrived, and when he killed, it was clean. The war was chaos. The Sith Brotherhood of Darkness, led by Lord Canon, had turned the galaxy into a graveyard. They fought not for vision, but for pride. Sith against Jedi. Sith against Sith. All in the name of unity that never existed. When Bane was discovered by a Sith recruiter, it was not fate. It was recognition. The Force had found what it needed, a vessel strong enough to reshape its own failures. He was taken to the academy on Korriban, where Sith Lords forged students into weapons. There he saw what the Sith had become, scholars of power without understanding it, hunters who fed on each other's fear. He studied relentlessly, consuming every text, every teaching, every lie. He did not crave titles. He craved truth. And the truth was this: the Sith were weak. They had turned the dark side into politics. They called each other brother while plotting each other's deaths in shadows. They had forgotten the ancient ways, the strength of a Junta Pulse, the fury of Mark Aragnos, the hunger of Nihilus. They sought equality in the dark, as if the dark was merciful. Bane saw the flaw clearly. He understood what no one else dared to say. The Sith could not be many. Because power, when shared, becomes thin. And thin power cannot change the galaxy. He trained harder than anyone. He mastered saber forms that had not been used in centuries. He devoured the lessons of the ancients, even those forbidden by the Brotherhood. The instructors noticed. They feared him. And when they could not control him, they tried to break him. He was expelled, stripped of his title, cast out as a failure. But they had already made their mistake, because in banishment he was free. He left Korriban and disappeared into the unknown regions. There, in tombs forgotten even by the Force, he found what the Brotherhood had buried, the lost wisdom of the Dark Lords of the Sith. He studied for months in silence, feeding on the memories of the ancients, their holocrons whispering across time. And when he returned to the galaxy, he did not come back as Bane the soldier. He learned of the rule of strength, that power must pass from master to apprentice through challenge and death. Or Bane the student. He came back as the last Sith of the old age. He came back as the truth the Sith had forgotten. The one who would kill an empire to rebuild it from its bones. He did not come back to be forgiven. He came back to end them. The Sith Brotherhood of Darkness ruled nothing. They spoke of unity, of survival, of strength in numbers. But Bane saw what they truly were, a cult of cowards, pretending that power could be shared. They wore the title of Sith like armor, but had forgotten what it meant to carry the weight of the dark side alone. Bane returned with knowledge they would not understand. He had studied the ancient Sith, Tulak Horde, Darth Revan, Naga Sado. He saw how power passed through lineage, not council. He saw that when many claim power, none can truly hold it. The Force, he believed, was not a weapon. It was a will, and that will demanded evolution through suffering. He confronted Lord Canon, the leader of the Brotherhood, not with violence, with truth. He told them they had abandoned the dark side's purpose, that their alliance was weakness masquerading as order. They laughed. They pitied him. Then they ignored him. So Bane left again. But this time, he did not seek understanding. He sought corruption. He traveled to Lehan, the Rakata homeworld, where the Starforge had once drawn power from raw Force energy. There, in the wreckage of forgotten empires, he built his future. He forged a Sith holocron, not to record what he had learned, but to ensure no one could unlearn it. He recorded the beginning of a new law, the rule of two. One to embody the power, one to crave it. He declared that only through conflict could the dark side grow, that only through betrayal could strength be passed forward. He sent his knowledge out into the Force, into the future, into destiny, that the Sith must be few, so their power would be pure. And then he returned to the war. The Brotherhood had retreated to Ruusan, fighting the Jedi in a final desperate campaign. Bane watched from orbit as they enacted Lord Kan's final plan, a thought bomb, a ritual of pure dark side energy designed to annihilate the Jedi. They believed it was victory, but Bane had planned it. He had fed the ritual into Kan's mind, knowing it would destroy everything, Jedi and Sith alike. When the bomb detonated, it consumed every force sensitive within miles. The light, the dark, the order, the Brotherhood, all gone. And Bane stood alone in the silence. Not broken, not triumphant, complete. He had killed the Sith to save them. But power, as he had written, must pass on. On Ruusan, in the aftermath of ash and death, he found her. A girl, a child, touched by the dark, survivor of the storm, and filled with hate so pure he felt the force move around her. Her name was Zana. He took her as his apprentice, not to protect her, not to teach her mercy, to teach her one truth. He did not raise her as a daughter. One must fall and one must rise. He raised her as a weapon. He taught her rituals from the ancient tombs. He showed her how to infect minds with fear, how to break souls without touch. And most of all, he taught her to watch him, to learn his weaknesses, to wait. Because when the time came, she would have to kill him. But because she was stronger, not because he failed. That was the rule. And she understood it. In silence, they vanished from history. The galaxy believed the Sith were extinct. The Jedi rebuilt. The Republic healed. But beneath it all, a shadow grew. Patient, focused, unseen, because knowledge in the dark does not vanish. It becomes legend. And legends wait. The Jedi believed the Sith were gone. But darkness does not end. It changes form. While the galaxy rebuilt itself from the ashes of Ruusan, Darth Bane began again. Not with armies, not with banners, but with one mind, one apprentice, and one law. The rule of two. It was not doctrine. It was survival. He understood what no Sith before him ever could, that the dark side was not a power to be hoarded, it was a current. It had to flow. And when too many tried to claim it, it collapsed. So Bane gave it structure, a design of cruelty and perfection. There would always be two, one to hold the power, one to crave it. The master would embody the dark side, its discipline, its knowledge, its absolute control. The apprentice would embody ambition, its hunger, its desire, its chaos. Together they would create balance through conflict. And when the apprentice became strong enough to kill the master, the cycle would begin again. This was not weakness. It was evolution. He told Zana that compassion was poison, that mercy was a lie. That strength was not dominance, it was endurance. It was to survive every attempt to be destroyed. To be Sith was not to destroy for pleasure. He taught her how to hide, how to walk among Jedi, how to whisper influence into senators, kings, and soldiers without ever revealing herself. Because Bane knew what the Jedi could not see. The galaxy did not belong to those who ruled it. It belonged to those who could wait for it. He built no empire. He built a legacy. While the Jedi rebuilt their republic, the Sith moved beneath their feet, two shadows in a galaxy of light. One that would last longer than any fleet or temple. Years passed. Too strong. Zana grew strong. She began to question him, to wonder if she could end him, to test him. And Bane saw it. He did not fear it. He encouraged it. He fed her doubts, sharpened her will, pushed her to hate him, because hate was the only path forward. But he too began to change. He had always believed that power must pass through death. Yet as his body aged, his fear of weakness began to eclipse his own law. He searched for immortality, not through the Force alone, but through transfer of essence, a forbidden ritual that would allow his spirit to possess another body. Zana discovered this. It was betrayal, but not unexpected. Because the rule of two was never about loyalty, it was about inevitability. The two faced each other on Ambria in a storm of dark side energy that split the sky open. Bane struck with fury. Zana defended with patience. In the end, the line between them disappeared. For hours they battled, lightning against shadow, strength against cunning, master against student. Bane tried to take her body, forcing his spirit into her mind, clawing for control. For a moment they merged, two voices, two wills, one soul. When the storm cleared, only one stood. She looked down at his fallen body. The eyes staring back were his color, his fire, but the smile was hers. No one could say who had won, but the galaxy would only ever know her name, Darth Zana. And the rule continued. The Jedi never found them. They believed the Dark had died on Ruusan. That peace had finally returned. But peace was the illusion Bane had always understood, because his rule was not a creed. It was a seed, one that would take centuries to bloom. Darth Bane died without a grave, without a monument, but his legacy did not die. Without a single empire to his name, it waited. Through Darth Zana, the rule of two continued, not as a story passed down, but as a secret, a curse, a torch carried in the dark, always by two, never more. Each new apprentice trained not in conquest, but in patience. Each master taught not just the Force, but the necessity of death. Their names vanished from history, buried beneath lies and rewritten records. The Jedi never knew. They believed peace had prevailed. They watched the Senate return to order. They defended a republic that grew complacent, proud, blind, and in the shadows, the Sith evolved. One pair, then another, and another. Some lasted decades, others fell within years, but the chain remained unbroken. Each generation perfected the rule, refined its cruelty, sharpened its logic. Masters who showed weakness were struck down. Apprentices who faltered were discarded. There were no more wars, and those strong enough to survive became the storm that would one day shatter the galaxy. No more armies, only influence, only corruption, only slow, careful control. And by the time the Jedi sensed it, it was far too late. A man named Plagueis studied the very essence of life and death. He believed the Force itself could be manipulated, not just used, but rewritten. He trained an apprentice who was quiet, calm, patient. His name was Palpatine, but the galaxy would come to know him by another, Darth Sidious. He was a student of Bane. He was not a conqueror. He did not raise armies until he had already won. He did not attack the Jedi until they had invited him into their temple. And when he did rise, he did so behind the mask of democracy. The Jedi never stood a chance, because they were not fighting a man. They were fighting a legacy. It was Bane who ensured they would not see it. It was Bane who taught that strength must be hidden until it could no longer be stopped. It was Bane who ended the Brotherhood, who rebuilt the Sith, who planted the root of every tragedy that followed. And it was the rule of two that broke the galaxy. When Sidious turned Anakin Skywalker, when Order 66 began, when the Jedi fell, screaming, across every system, that was not just the victory of one Sith. It was the final note of a plan written 1,000 years before. It had taken generations. But the Sith had done what no Republic, no Separatist, no Jedi ever could. They ended peace. They ended balance. They ended hope. And they did it with only two. Because Darth Bane understood something the Jedi never could. That fear is stronger than wisdom. that patience is sharper than light, and that power, real power, is quiet until it is not. The rule of two did not die with Sidious. It transformed, because even when one Sith falls, the other always remains. The Sith were gone. That was the truth as the Jedi understood it. That after the devastation of Ruusan, after the death of the Brotherhood, there were no more Sith. Not in name, not in presence, not in the Force. They were wrong. The Sith did not die. They disappeared. They folded into the fabric of the galaxy, silent, hidden, undetectable. But they were there, watching, studying, whispering through the bones of fallen empires. For 1,000 years the Jedi walked through a galaxy that was no longer theirs. They held seats in the Senate. They taught new generations. They fought small wars. But the real war had already begun in secret. It was not fought with armies. It was not fought with blades. It was a war of patience, of silence, 1,000 years of shadows, and behind them, the rule of two. No banners, no cults, just a line of masters and apprentices moving through the underworld like ghosts, each one inheriting the scars of the last, each one bound by the same command: remain unseen, until it is too late. Some hid as merchants, some as aristocrats. Others vanished into the unknown regions entirely. But all of them followed the path that Darth Bane had left behind. Every Sith who survived those centuries added to the blueprint, refining it, testing it. The Jedi never noticed, because there was nothing to see. They sensed no armies being raised. They heard no planets fall. There were only accidents, assassinations, rumors, and with every false peace, the Sith grew closer to their final design. They did not care about systems. They learned how to shape ideologies, bend economies, exploit factions from within. They studied corruption like a weapon. They cared about systems of thought. They mastered political manipulation. And they began embedding themselves into the very structure the Jedi had sworn to protect. The Republic, not to serve it, but to rot it, one senator, one trade route at a time, one guild. The Jedi looked outward, to threats, to violence, to prophecy, but the real danger was already inside the house. It did not roar, it whispered, and by the time it spoke, it was already too late, because one Sith had begun to see farther than any before. But into the Force itself, not just into the structure of power. He did not want control. He wanted immortality. He was not a warrior. His name was Darth Plagueis. He was not a conqueror. He was a scientist. And that made him far more dangerous. The galaxy would remember him as Darth Plagueis the Wise, but wisdom was not what he sought. He sought control, not of planets, not of people, but of life itself. He believed the Force was not divine. It was biological. It flowed through everything that lived, through cells, through blood, through the smallest living fragments called midichlorians. And if life could be created, it could also be commanded. Plagueis studied this truth, not in temples, but in laboratories. He gathered slaves, politicians, and prisoners. He experimented for years, killing, reviving, breaking, and remaking in secret. He pushed the Force to obey him, to yield its mysteries through logic instead of faith. He learned that the Force could be bent, that it could sustain life even when death had already claimed the body. He could heal. He could extend. He could restore. And eventually he discovered that he could create. It began as whispers. Ripples in the Force where none should have been. Life forming where there had been nothing. He called it perfection. The Jedi would have called it blasphemy. For Plagueis, this was not evil. It was evolution. He believed he had transcended the old limitations of the Sith, that the rule of two was not a curse, but a foundation for something greater. No more endless wars. The galaxy would be reborn under logic and control. No more waste. Through the dark side, guided by him. But the dark side does not share. It does not reward peace. Plagueis thought he was mastering the Force. But in truth, the Force was studying him. The more he manipulated it, the more it pushed back. The deeper he reached into its nature, the more his power began to turn against him. He did not see it then. He only saw progress. He grew old without weakness, wealthy without notice, powerful without fear. He controlled banks. He controlled trade guilds. He began to move the Senate like a game of Deheric pieces. But the galaxy was not enough. He needed a successor, someone who could carry his vision into eternity. Someone intelligent, cunning, and patient. And he found him on Naboo, a young Senator Set's aide, quiet, charismatic, curious. His name was Palpatine. Plagueis sensed something in him that few ever did, not potential, but silence. The kind of silence that hides hunger. He took the young man under his wing, teaching him politics, philosophy, economics, and slowly the Force. Not through temples or sabers, through influence, through control. He showed him how the galaxy could be shaped without a single shot fired. And the student learned quickly. Too quickly. Plagueis believed he was molding the perfect heir, one who would complete the great design and finally bring the galaxy under a single will. He did not realize what he was truly creating. He was not building a successor. He was building his end. Because in teaching Palpatine to control life, he was teaching him how to take it. And one night, while Plagueis slept, surrounded by wealth, power, and the illusion of safety, the apprentice reached out through the Force, and without a word, killed his master. No blade, no struggle, just silence. The kind of silence that Bane had once imagined, the kind that ends an era. Plagueis had finally achieved what he desired. He had conquered death. He simply did not survive it. He was no longer Palpatine. He was no longer an aide, nor a student, nor a shadow. He was Darth Sidious, and no one knew. He did not wear a cloak in public. He did not wield a saber before the Jedi. He smiled. He bowed. He waited. For the first time in galactic history, a Sith Lord stood at the heart of the Republic, and no one sensed him. Not because they were weak, because he was empty. He had no fear, no hesitation, no trace of conflict in the Force. He had been trained in pure silence, taught not to battle the Jedi, but to dissolve them. Not with war, with politics. Darth Sidious did not want to fight the Republic. He wanted to become it. Every vote, every treaty, every appointment, all of it moved beneath his hand. And still, no one knew. The Jedi sat across from him in the Senate, unaware that they were speaking to their end. Because Sidious had studied every weakness they had, not their lightsaber forms, not their defenses, but their pride. He understood that the Jedi believed in the Order more than the Force, that their faith had shifted from balance to control. And he exploited it. He engineered trade disputes. He stirred unrest on the Outer Rim. He whispered promises into corporate ears and fed old fears into new agendas. He created problems that only the Republic could solve, then placed himself as the only voice of reason, a voice that calmed, that reassured, that smiled. But beneath that smile, something else had begun to grow. A plan older than himself, a design born from centuries of waiting to destroy the Jedi. Not with blasters, with votes, to turn the Republic. Not through revolution, through fear. And to create war, not through anger, but through necessity. Because Sidious had learned something from his master that even Plagueis never understood. Power did not come from control, it came from chaos. And to rule the galaxy, he would need both sides of the next war. He would need a republic, and he would need an enemy. So he reached out again, this time to the forgotten edges of the galaxy, to an ancient people, to a lost ideology. He found a warrior who believed the Republic had failed, a Jedi Knight who walked away from the Order and wore no name anymore. A man named Dooku. Sidious spoke to him not as a Sith, but as a patriot, as a realist, as a man who saw what the Jedi could not. And Dooku listened, because in his heart he knew the truth that the galaxy no longer needed peace. It needed clarity, and that clarity would only come through fire. Sidious made Dooku his new apprentice, but not in secret, not in silence. Dooku would become a public enemy, a separatist leader, the face of discontent, the perfect lie. Because while Dooku built an army to fight the Republic, Sidious ordered one to defend it. 2 wars, 1 master, no one knew. And so the Clone Wars began, a conflict that would last only a few years, but the damage would last forever. Because behind the war, behind the votes, behind every casualty, Darth Sidious was still smiling. Not as a Sith, not as a villain, but as Chancellor Palpatine, the most powerful man in the galaxy. And no one, not even his apprentice, knew who he truly was. It did not collapse all at once. It fell in stages, and every stage was designed. The Jedi believed they were holding the line, fighting for peace, defending freedom. But the war they led was not a defense, it was a test. Every skirmish, every vote, every death, all of it served only one purpose: to make the galaxy afraid. Afraid of instability, afraid of corruption, afraid of chaos. And into that fear stepped one man, not as a conqueror, but as a savior. Chancellor Palpatine asked for nothing at first. He spoke of unity. He mourned the losses. He assured them that democracy would survive. But behind the curtain, he had already rewritten everything. The Republic's emergency powers were his. The clone army answered only to him. And the Jedi were no longer generals. They were pawns. Sidious had not defeated them with darkness. He had used light. He had made them believe they were righteous. And when that belief blinded them, he opened the final door. Order 66. One command, given in silence, executed in moments. Across hundreds of worlds, Jedi fell not in battle, but in betrayal. They were not killed by Sith. They were executed by their own soldiers, brothers they had fought beside, trusted, protected. Children were slaughtered, temples burned, names erased, and still, no one knew who had done it. Because when the dust settled, the Chancellor was still smiling. He declared a new beginning, a new safety, a new empire, and the galaxy cheered. They did not see the Sith. They saw peace. The war was over. The Jedi were gone, and the Republic no longer existed. In the span of a single day, the Sith had done what no army, no fleet, no prophecy ever could. They had won. Not through the Force, through patience, through the rule of 2. One to embody the power, and one to crave it. Darth Vader's legacy had worked. The line had endured, hidden, growing stronger with every generation. And now, in the darkness of Coruscant Sith's throne room, that line reached its peak. A master who ruled the stars, and an apprentice who waited silently. Because even now, in absolute power, Darth Sidious feared only one thing: his apprentice. Not for what he was, but for what he would become. The rule of 2 had not ended. It had only evolved. The Sith were no longer shadows. They were the Empire, and the galaxy was theirs. He was born a slave on a planet that did not exist in the records of the Republic. No birth certificate, no father, just sand, heat, and silence. His mother called him Anakin. He did not cry often. He learned early that crying changed nothing. The cuffs stayed on, the bruises faded on their own, and the bombs inside his body, placed there by the Hutts, reminded him every second that running was not freedom, it was suicide. But Anakin dreamed, always, dreams of speed, of stars, of leaving, of something more. He built machines because they were the only things he could control. He built droids so he could talk to someone who never judged him. He fixed podraces because no one else on Tatooine believed a human child could pilot one. He did. No one noticed what stirred beneath his skin. No one except her. She was cloaked in peace. Jedi robes, quiet steps. Her name was Qui-Gon Jinn. She found him not by accident, but because the Force had whispered. When Qui-Gon saw the boy, he did not see dirt or chains. He saw imbalance, too much power in one so young, too much pain hiding behind wide eyes. He tested the boy's blood. The readings were impossible. Over 20,000 midichlorians, more than Master Yoda. Anakin was not born of man. He had no father, only the Force. Qui-Gon's voice trembled when he said it aloud. He is the chosen one. That sentence sealed Anakin's fate. From that moment on, his life was no longer his own. The Jedi Council was disturbed. They did not trust prophecies, they did not trust attachments, and they did not trust Anakin. Too old, too emotional, too afraid. They saw darkness circling him, even then. But they allowed it, only because Qui-Gon Jinn defied them, and because Obi-Wan Kenobi, his apprentice, took on the burden after his death. Anakin was taken from his mother. There was no ceremony, no farewell. Just a silent ship lifting into the sky as she faded from view, holding back tears. The Jedi said it was for his training, that fear must be let go, that attachment was the path to suffering. But no one asked what it meant to take a boy raised in chains and give him rules colder than the slavers he had just escaped. At night, Anakin dreamed of her. In daylight he buried it, but fear lived beneath the surface and the Jedi never saw it. They trained him to be a knight, a weapon. They praised his talents in battle, admired his instincts, but they feared his emotions and never asked where those emotions came from. He was not born for peace. He was born during a slow collapse. By the time he reached adulthood, the galaxy was already dying. The Republic was a machine without soul. The Jedi Council debated shadows while war drew near. And Anakin Skywalker, the one foretold to bring balance, was pulled into a life where every choice came with blood. He could win battles, but not save the ones he loved. He could wield power, but never question the Council. He could feel the Force stronger than any Jedi before him, but was told not to trust it. He began to ask questions no Jedi wanted to hear. What was balance? Why were they guardians of peace, but generals in war? Why did attachment lead to fear, but detachment lead to silence? He waited for answers, but the Jedi gave silence. They believed the code would protect him. They did not understand. He never had a code, he had a promise. The last thing he ever told his mother was that they would see each other again, and when he did see her, she died in his arms. Her eyes wide, her voice whispering his name, her body broken by years of slavery. That day, something shattered in him. The ground burned. The screams of Tusken Raiders filled the desert, but inside Anakin, there was only a boy kneeling over his mother, and the sound of his own breath shaking. He was not a hero. He was not a Jedi, not in that moment. He was just a child who had lost everything, again. But no one came. No Jedi comforted him. No council asked why. They spoke of discipline. They spoke of the path, but Anakin was no longer walking the path. He was being dragged. He had no father. He had no peace. He had no home. He was trained to fight, to serve, to obey, but not to feel. And so he buried the pain deeper. Beneath the lightsaber, beneath the armor, beneath the smile, waiting. Jedi were not allowed to love. The code said it was attachment, that it led to fear, that it led to suffering. But Anakin Skywalker was not trained in silence. He was trained in obedience, and somewhere deep beneath the layers of war, duty, and prophecy, he was still human. Her name was Padme. She had known him when he was still a boy, awkward, kind, and strange. But when they met again years later, she no longer saw a slave or a child. She saw a protector, a man shaped by fire, carrying too much weight behind too calm a face. He was assigned to guard her, but it never felt like a mission. They talked like people who had been waiting for each other across time, as if the galaxy had held its breath for them. He told her of Tatooine, of sand that never washed away, of the Jedi Temple, where he felt more alone than he ever had as a slave, of dreams that never let him sleep. She told him of duty, of fear, of standing in the Senate while the Republic crumbled from within and feeling powerless to stop it. They laughed, they argued, they listened, and they fell in love. But the galaxy did not care. So they married in secret, no witnesses, no celebrations, just a lake, a vow, and a lie that would grow heavier with every passing day. To the Jedi, Anakin remained the chosen one, gifted, reckless, and difficult, but no one suspected that his silence was not discipline, it was guilt. Every council meeting, every mission, every battle, he carried her with him in his thoughts and never said a word. But the Force does not forget. It moves through love, as it does through rage, and it sees the path ahead long before the walker understands it. Anakin Set's dreams began again, but this time they were worse. Not of war, not of slavery, of Padme, dying, screaming, reaching out to him through the Force. He woke with his hands shaking, with breath caught in his throat, with silence all around him. The same silence that followed his mother's death. And suddenly, love became fear again. He remembered what it felt like to lose the only person who ever looked at him like a son. He would not let it happen again. So he searched for answers. But the Jedi gave him none. They sensed turmoil in him, but offered lectures. They saw him drift further, but demanded obedience. He asked Master Yoda what to do about the fear of loss. Yoda told him to train himself to let go of everything he feared to lose. But Anakin did not want to let go. He wanted to protect. He wanted to save her. And someone else was listening. Chancellor Palpatine, a friend, a guide, a mentor in shadows, saw what the Jedi refused to see. He spoke to Anakin not as a master, but as an equal. He praised his instincts. He understood his emotions. He never told him to let go. Instead, he told him a story of Darth Plagueis the Wise, a Sith Lord who had learned to manipulate life itself, who could save the ones he loved from dying. It was said he knew how to keep others from death, but not himself. That story changed everything. To Anakin, it was not a fable, it was a path, a whisper from the dark that promised what the light never could. The Jedi said love was dangerous, but the Sith said it could be mastered. Anakin began to walk two roads. By day, he served the Jedi, a general, a warrior, a knight. By night, he listened to the Chancellor, a student, a seeker, a man running from fate. Padme noticed. He smiled less, he spoke in riddles, he stood at the window longer at night, eyes lost in the stars, and when she placed his hand on her stomach, the place where their child grew, he wept. He was happy, but he was terrified, because he had seen this ending before. He had held death in his arms before, and now he had more to lose than ever. He did not know who to trust. He loved the Jedi, but he feared their judgment. He loved Padme, but he feared losing her more than anything. And in his fear, he began to believe that love must be protected at all costs, even from the people he once swore to serve, because deep inside him, something had changed. The boy who had no choice had now made one. He would do whatever it took to keep her alive, even if the light had no place for him anymore. The Clone Wars burned across the stars. Millions died, planets fell, armies grew stronger, and every shadow became a weapon. To the galaxy, Anakin Skywalker was a hero. He led the 501st Legion into impossible battles, freed worlds from separatist rule, held the line when no one else could. But war does not build trust, it builds cracks, and Anakin was cracking. He saw it in the faces of the clones, soldiers grown for war, trained to obey, built to die. He never saw slaves again. He saw himself. And still, the Jedi Council gave orders. They spoke of the Force, of destiny, of control, but not once did they ask what the war was doing to the boy they called the Chosen One. They treated him like a tool, and tools break. He began to ask questions. Why were the Jedi now generals? Why were they protecting a republic that traded freedom for control? Why did peace feel more distant the longer they fought? The answers never came. But the Chancellor did. Palpatine became his constant. He praised Anakin's victories, listened to his doubts, reminded him that the Jedi were fallible, proud, blind. And Anakin began to believe it. Because the Jedi Council no longer trusted him. They denied him the rank of Master, they questioned his loyalty, and when Palpatine asked for him to be appointed to the Council as his representative, they agreed, but only so they could use him. They asked him to spy on Palpatine, the man he considered a friend, the man who had never betrayed him. Anakin was torn in half. The order that raised him now feared him. The man who guided him now tempted him. And Padme, the only one who loved him without condition, watched him slip away. She spoke of democracy, of the Senate falling to silence, of how she no longer recognized the republic she once fought to preserve. Anakin heard her, but he was drowning. Every dream of her death haunted him. Every council meeting left him more alone. Every battle ended with a victory that felt like a loss. And then the truth came. Palpatine revealed himself. He was not just a Chancellor. He was a Sith Lord. The Dark Lord the Jedi had been hunting for years. He had been beside them all along. He offered Anakin power, knowledge, the way to save Padme, the ability to stop death. And he told Anakin something no one else had ever said. He understood. He understood why Anakin was afraid, why he could not let go, why the Jedi were wrong. He did not promise peace. He promised control. Anakin did not kill him. He could have, but he did not. Because for the first time, he saw clearly. The Jedi were not just blind. They were dangerous. They had led the Republic into war. They had turned soldiers into numbers. They had told him to betray a man who had never once failed him. He returned to the council and said nothing. But inside, something had already shifted. He began to watch them differently. He no longer heard wisdom, only pride. He no longer felt trust, only commands. And when Mace Windu moved to arrest the Chancellor without trial, Anakin followed. He claimed it was for justice, but it was fear. He needed Palpatine alive, because if the Sith could truly save Padme, then the Jedi had become a threat. He stood in that room, between Master and Sith, between light and dark, and when Windu raised his saber, Anakin chose. He cut off Windu Sep's hand. He watched lightning devour the Jedi Master. He fell to his knees. Then Palpatine gave him a name, Darth Vader. The Chosen One was gone. The prophecy broken, not by hate, not by lust for power, but by a lie. The lie that the Republic was still just, the lie that the Jedi always knew best, the lie that the ends would never justify the means. Anakin had given everything, his childhood, his love, his trust, and all it gave him was silence. So now he would take, and in taking, he would save the one thing left that mattered. Even if the galaxy had to burn to make it real. The sky over Coruscant was calm. No alarms, no screams, no warning. But inside the Jedi Temple, the storm had already begun. Darth Vader walked the halls in silence. Not Anakin. Not the boy from Tatooine. Not the hero of the Clone Wars. Only the shadow that remained. At his side marched the 501st clones bred to obey, to execute Order 66 without hesitation. And that order had come from the Chancellor, from the Sith. The Jedi were now traitors, enemies of peace. And Anakin, no, Vader, was the sword to silence them. He killed the temple guards first, then the masters, then the knights, then the children. He did not hesitate, because hesitation was weakness, and weakness had cost him too much. He moved through the temple like a ghost. Blade ignited, eyes cold. He felt their fear, their confusion, but he felt nothing for it. Because he believed, truly believed, that this was the only way. Padme would live. The war would end, and he would no longer be afraid. But the galaxy does not change through belief. It changes through blood. Across star systems, Jedi fell. Some were ambushed by clones they once called brothers. Others died alone, sensing the cries of the Force going silent one by one. Yoda felt it. So did Obi-Wan. And when Obi-Wan returned to Coruscant, he saw the smoke. He saw the temple burning. He saw the archives, the statues, the memory of the Order torn apart. And worst of all, he saw the security recordings. The boy he raised, the brother he loved, slaughtering Jedi without pause. He could not look away. Because there was no lie left. Anakin Skywalker was gone. Padme still believed he could be saved. She went to Mustafar, to the fire, to the place where Vader waited, surrounded by the ashes of the Separatist leadership, all of them slain by his hand. He told her it was over, that he had brought peace, that he had ended the war. But there was no peace in his eyes, only obsession. She begged him to stop, to run away, to be free. But Vader no longer knew what freedom was. All he knew was that everyone was against him. The Jedi, the Council, Obi-Wan, even Padme. Because she brought him. She brought Obi-Wan. And Vader saw it not as betrayal, but as war. The duel was not between Jedi and Sith. It was between brothers, between past and future, between a man who could not let go and the one who still believed he could. They fought across the facility, through steam, fire, and metal. Screams, sparks, silence. And in the end, Anakin fell. Obi-Wan stood above him, saber raised, heart broken. He begged Anakin to stop, to let go. But it was too late. Vader cursed him, cursed the Jedi, cursed everything. Obi-Wan did not kill him, but he left him to die, burning, screaming, alone. And that should have been the end. But death did not want Vader. Palpatine came. He saved what was left. The body was broken, the limbs gone, the skin scorched. But the hate lived. He was encased in black armor, a shell of breath and silence. a machine to preserve pain. When he awoke, Padme was gone. His reason, his love, his light. He killed her, not with a weapon, but with his choice. And in that moment, Anakin died again, not by flame, but by despair. What rose in his place was not a Sith, not truly. It was something colder, darker. The Chosen One had become a monster, not by prophecy, but by design, by fear, by silence, by every lie he was forced to believe, until truth meant nothing. Vader would serve the Empire. He would hunt what remained of the Jedi. He would crush rebellions, break planets, and destroy hope. But inside the armor, he would remain a prisoner, because the dark side does not set you free. It only tells you what you want to hear before it takes everything. And Vader had nothing left to give, not even himself. The galaxy cheered. The Emperor was dead, his throne had been shattered, and his fortress had fallen in fire. But even as the second Death Star burned above Endor, something in the Force did not move. There was no peace. Because what the galaxy had destroyed was a body, not the will inside it. The Empire did not vanish. It scattered like ash on the wind. Moffs, warlords, admirals, each one took a piece of the dead machine and tried to make it breathe again. Some clung to loyalty. Others sought only survival. But none of them knew that they were still playing from the same page, following the same code, repeating the same cycle, unaware that it had already been written. Operation Cinder began just days after the Emperor's death. The orders came not from men, but from red-robed messengers, droids wearing Palpatine's face. Their message was clear. If the Emperor could not live, then the Empire did not deserve to either. Cities were set ablaze. Planets were cracked open. Loyal worlds were turned into warnings. It was not vengeance. It was doctrine. This was not about grief. It was about control. Even in death, the Sith Master would not give the galaxy peace. He had planned for this. Not just survival, but transformation. While the New Republic gathered its strength, the Imperial remnant fractured. Some fled into the unknown regions. Others dissolved into piracy, taking their fleets and vanishing into forgotten space. One by one, the great names of the Empire fell. Sate Pestage, Yasan Izard, Grand Admiral Thrawn. But with every death, the wound only deepened. The Empire did not fade, it waited. Because power, real power, does not need to be seen. It does not beg for attention. It plants itself deep beneath the surface of history and learns how to pretend it is gone. The Battle of Jakku was supposed to be the final end, the Empire's last stand. A desert world scarred by gravity wells and orbital crashes. Hundreds of star destroyers fell. The last Grand Vizier signed the Galactic Concordance. On paper, the Empire surrendered. But the Force does not bind itself to paper. While the galaxy moved forward, something moved deeper. In the chaos of retreat, the Sith Eternal cult withdrew to Exegol, a world hidden in the heart of the unknown regions, veiled by gravitational storms and buried star charts. It was not a base, it was a temple, a machine, a graveyard. They did not rebuild, they bred. Clones, ships, belief. The Sith were not gone, they had simply changed shape. Back in known space, the New Republic struggled to hold unity. Worlds argued over trade, representation, justice. Many still feared the Jedi, and many more feared what the Empire might become again. There was no strong center, there was no shared memory. Peace had come but not healing. And in that quiet, something ancient began to whisper again. The galaxy thought it had defeated tyranny, but it had only paused its momentum. Because the Sith had never been just men, they had been moments, ideas, a lesson the galaxy kept forgetting, that power is never defeated. It only wears new armor. By the time the First Order rose from the edge of known space, it was already too late to ask where it had come from. It marched with the colors of the old empire. It spoke in words once spoken by Tarkin, by Hux, by Dooku, by Sado. But its heart was something older. It had always been waiting. Palpatine had not died. Not completely. His body had perished, yes, but through forbidden science and ritual, his spirit had passed into a vessel, a clone twisted by the dark side, weak, incomplete, but awake. The Sith did not return with fire. They returned in whispers, in shadows, through servants who did not even know they were serving. And the galaxy, so hungry to forget, let it happen. There were senators who knew, generals who suspected, Jedi who felt it. But truth, when it is inconvenient, often dies before it can be proven. So power returned, not as a declaration, but as a question: what if we are safer under control? What if freedom is the real danger? The old answers came back. Order, strength, security. The same words, spoken by new voices, and once again the people listened. Because fear does not care about history. And neither does power. It had waited, now it would rise again. The galaxy believed it had been saved, but for Luke Skywalker, the end of war was not the end of conflict. It was only the beginning of something quieter and heavier. He had faced the Dark Lord. He had cast down his lightsaber. He had refused to kill, and in that moment, his father, Darth Vader, had returned to the light. But that victory did not feel like triumph. It felt like loss. Anakin Skywalker was gone, and the Force had not grown brighter in his absence. If anything, it had grown still, as if waiting. Luke tried to rebuild what had been lost. He searched for texts, artifacts, whispers of the old Jedi Order. He traveled to forgotten worlds, Ossus, Tython, Dantooine, each one a ruin of memory. The Jedi had once been everywhere. Now they were myths. He was alone. But he was not just rebuilding an order. He was carrying a question: why had the Jedi fallen? The Clone Wars, the betrayal, the blindness. Somewhere the Jedi had lost their way. They had become soldiers. They had obeyed the Republic as if it were the Force itself. And when the darkness came, they had not seen it. Luke did not want to repeat that. So he changed. He taught with more compassion, less dogma. He listened. He doubted. He opened himself to feelings the old Jedi had called dangerous. And yet, doubt has a way of growing in silence. As the years passed, Luke began to feel something under the surface of the Force, a coldness, not like Palpatine, not like Vader, something older and patient. He trained students. He tried to build a future, but with every lesson, he wondered, was he teaching truth or just hope? Among his students was a boy named Ben, Leia's son, Han's son, his own blood, the legacy of Skywalker. Luke saw power in the child, raw, unstable, brilliant. He also saw something else, a shadow in the Force, something watching. Ben was not like other students. He questioned everything. He felt too much. He carried a storm inside him, and Luke feared that storm would break. One night, that fear became a thought. That thought became a feeling. And for a brief moment, a flicker only, Luke ignited his lightsaber. He saw the future, death, destruction, the rise of a darkness he could not name. But it passed, and when it did, Ben was awake. He saw the blade. He saw his uncle standing over him, and in that instant, the bond was shattered. Ben fled. He burned the temple, killed the others, and vanished into the unknown. Luke blamed himself, not for the act, but for the fear. He had done what the Jedi of old had done, tried to control what he did not understand. And like them, he had failed. He disappeared from the galaxy. He went to Arc 2, the site of the first Jedi temple, but he did not go to study. He went to forget. The Jedi had been wrong. The Sith had been wrong. And in their endless war, billions had died. Luke chose silence. But the Force does not allow silence for long. Because the dark side had found Ben, It had waited for someone just like him, powerful, wounded, angry. It gave him a name, Kylo Ren. Snoke shaped him, lied to him, told him the Jedi had betrayed him, that his family feared him, that the light inside him was weakness. Ben listened, because pain makes the loudest teacher. The sun became the weapon, and Luke, the last Jedi, became a myth. The galaxy fell into confusion. The First Order rose, the Resistance fought back, but at the center of it all was a truth that none could say aloud. Darth Vader had not ended with Anakin Sep's death. He had continued in legacy, in blood, in silence. The Skywalker line had become a mirror. On one side, hope, on the other, hunger. And in the middle, guilt. Luke returned only once, as a projection, to buy time with his own image. He did not strike, he did not kill, he only stood. Because he knew now, power is not just in strength, it is in restraint, in choice. But Ben Kylo could not yet see that, because the son was still chasing the father, not Anakin, but Vader. And the galaxy had not yet answered the question that birthed them both. What does it mean to be chosen? The Force is not loyal. It moves like a tide, rising, retreating, reshaping everything it touches. And when one side fades, the other stirs. The age of Palpatine had ended. The Jedi were scattered. The balance was broken once again. But the dark side had never left. It had simply changed its voice. From the unknown regions came whispers of something ancient, an echo of the Sith, older than the Empire, older than the Republic itself. It was not one person. It was a network, a design, the Sith eternal. They had hidden for generations, following the last command of their emperor, to wait, to rebuild, to rise again. They worshipped the dark side not as religion, but as destiny. Their priests built citadels beneath red lightning. Their engineers constructed fleets in the void. They cloned, experimented, and prayed to a voice that spoke through machines and vessels, a voice that sounded like death itself. It was Palpatine. He had survived in fragments, his spirit torn between hosts, bound to technology, anchored by ritual. He was not alive, not truly. But the dark side is not measured by life, it is measured by will. And Palpatine's set's will had never broken. He whispered through Snoke, a creation of flesh and command, molded to rule from afar. Through Snoke, he tested the galaxy again. Through Snoke, he turned the last Skywalker to the dark. Through Snoke, he reached Ben Solo. Kylo Ren rose from that connection, neither Sith nor Jedi, but something between, a man who hated his own reflection. He wanted to finish what Vader had started, but he did not understand what Vader had truly become. He believed that destruction was the way to peace. He thought he was free of the old orders, free of masters, but he was not free. He was still a pawn in the same story, the same pattern that had repeated since Bane, since Revan, since the first war between light and dark. V was the other half of that awakening. A scavenger from Jakku, unknown, untrained, unwanted. But the Force does not care where you are born. It finds balance in places that seem forgotten. And in her, it found resistance. She carried something in her blood, something that should not have existed. She was not only strong with the Force, she was a Palpatine, the last echo of a lineage built from death and control. The granddaughter of the Emperor stood against the grandson of the fallen hero. Light against dark, hope against obsession, both bound to legacies they never asked for. When Rey trained under Leia, she did not seek glory, she sought understanding. But the Force was restless. It showed her visions of thrones, lightning, and shadows, the same shadows that had never truly died. It called her to darkness, to temptation, to the power she feared to use. Kylo hunted her, fought her, connected to her. But beneath the conflict, something else grew. recognition. The bond between them was not only through bloodlines, but through the Force itself. Two halves of the same imbalance. He tried to make her his ally. She tried to save him. And with every duel, every scar, every moment of silence between strikes, they drew closer to the truth neither wanted to face. The Sith did not need armies. They needed heirs. Palpatine's plan was simple. One vessel strong enough to contain him, to rule eternity through another. And both of them, Rey and Ben, were chosen. The galaxy fell into chaos again. The New Republic burned, the Resistance fled. Planets were silenced under fleets that had no names. And once more the dark side looked inevitable. But something had changed. Rey had seen the cost of victory. She had seen Luke's despair, Ben's hunger, Anakin's fall, and she realized what none of them could see. That power does not serve you. It consumes you. She did not want the throne. She did not want to destroy the Sith. She only wanted the fighting to stop. But the Force is a mirror. It reflects what you bring into it. So when the final confrontation came, when Rey faced the Emperor reborn on Exegol, she did not fight for control. She stood for balance. And when Ben returned, when he threw away his blade and name, when he saved her instead of himself, the cycle broke. For a moment, two bloodlines, Skywalker and Palpatine, ended the war not with conquest but with surrender. Not by taking life, but by giving it. And yet, in the silence that followed, the Force did not rest. Because it never does. There is peace. But it does not feel like peace. It feels like a pause between breaths. Rey buries the sabers of Luke and Leia in the sands of Tatooine, the place where it all began. Two weapons that shaped the fate of galaxies, laid to rest in silence. The twin suns rise, just as they always have. But the galaxy does not know what comes next. The Sith are gone. The Jedi are gone. The war is over. But the Force remains. It is still there, in the wind, in the stars, in the empty corners of space. It waits. It watches. And deep within it, the memory of every choice still echoes. Because the Force is not an ending. It is a cycle. Every light casts a shadow. Every fall begins with hope. And every hero carries the seed of their own destruction. The ancient Sith knew this. That is why they created the rule of two. One to have the power, and one to crave it. They believed that this hunger would keep them sharp. That betrayal was not failure, it was tradition. But hunger does not stop. It grows. And in the end, it always consumes itself. The Jedi tried to stop the cycle by denying it. They taught discipline, peace, detachment. But in doing so, they created cracks. They could not see the darkness in their own halls. They did not see Dooku fall. They did not see Anakin break. They thought peace was control. But peace is not the absence of emotion. It is the understanding of it. Luke understood that too late. He saw what fear could do. And so he vanished, believing that the Jedi should end. But the Force did not let him go. It brought Rey to him, not to fight, not to teach, but to remember. Because even legends must be questioned. Even truth must be relearned. The galaxy will rebuild, new orders will rise, new wars will burn. But now there is a whisper of something different. When Rey ignites her own saber, its blade is not blue. It is not green. It is yellow, the color of balance, the color of watchers, of sentinels. She does not call herself a Jedi, but she carries what matters: compassion, clarity, choice. And the story, the one that began with a boy in the desert and ended with a girl in the same sands, feels complete. But it is not, because someone, somewhere, will feel anger. Someone will feel alone. Someone will hear the voice of the dark side, not as evil but as comfort. and it will begin again. Because power does not die. It hibernates. It evolves. It whispers to those who feel powerless. There will always be someone who believes they are strong enough to control it. There will always be someone who thinks they can use the dark without becoming it. And so the Force continues, not as a war, but as a wound. One that never heals. One that opens every time love turns to fear, or fear turns to rage. But there is something else too. Something that the Sith never understood. Something even the Jedi forgot. The Force is not a weapon. It is not a prize. It is not meant to be controlled. It is memory. It is the scream of Alderaan, the breath of a dying master, the tears of a son who could not save his father. It is every choice, every regret, every small act of kindness that was never seen. It remembers, and because it remembers, it forgives. Rey stands alone, but she is not alone. She carries them all, the ones who fell, the ones who rose, the ones who never chose a side. And somewhere beyond death, Anakin watches. So does Luke. So does Leia. And for the first time in generations, there is no throne, no war, only quiet. But the story will return. It always does. Not as prophecy, not as destiny, but as a choice. Because balance is not given, it is made. And in the ashes of empire and the echo of legends, a new voice will rise. One that does not ask what side it is on. One that asks only one question: what will I do with the power I am given? That is the real war, and it never ends.